Welcome to Thomistic Womanhood. In today's video, we're going to talk about St. Joan of Arc and is she or is she not a feminist icon? Happy Thomistic Tuesday. Welcome to Thomistic Womanhood. In today's video, we're going to talk about St. Joan of Arc. This is actually the third time I filmed this, so hopefully my camera will work. But St. Joan of Arc has often been allegedly claimed by the feminists as a feminist icon. She was rejecting her time's gender roles, and so she's this beacon of light for them. I'm going to show that that's false. She's actually not a feminist icon. And yeah, so let's get into it. All right, so first off, we're going to kind of list the main characteristics of feminism, and then I'm going to go down the line and I'm going to talk about each one and how I don't think St. Joan of Arc fulfills that characteristic. Having said that, one little side note about St. Joan of Arc that is interesting is she is one of the very few saints that actually has documentation of her life that was written at the time. You know, a lot of saints, people write about them afterward, but because of her notoriety, because of her position as a political figure, and especially because of the trials she went through, for those that don't know, she led an army. You know, she was a country girl and she heard basically voices from God telling her to go lead an army to help end the 100 Years' War. And she resisted it at first, but you know, she finally came around, she went and did it. And she did a bunch of battles, they had a lot of victories. The rightful king of France was put back on the throne. However, she did get captured in battle by the English, who then charged her as a heretic, as a witch, and then they burned her at the stake. Clearly, they were fighting the English, so it's clearly that was like a political, kind of a sham trial. But during that trial, much like we do nowadays in our legal proceedings, there were a lot of clerks and people documenting everything that was said, just writing down the whole progression of the trial as it was happening. And then after her death, her family went to the lawful authorities. I don't know exactly how long it was. It might have been maybe like a decade or so after her death. They went back to the French authorities and they said, look, we all know that trial was a sham. Can we reopen her case and have like a remedial trial done to show that, you know, she wasn't a witch, she wasn't a heretic? So of course they did that, and it was close enough to where they were able to pull in a lot of the men that fought with her and a lot of people who knew her. And so then again, that trial was recorded. There were a lot of depositions. And all those documents were recently translated into English, and I read a book that, you know, had like extensive quotes from the documentation, which is where I got the information for this video. So, having said that, let's get into it, and I'll try to make this brief. So, feminism. We're going to go down. There are about 7 characteristics. I have my notes right here, so I'll be looking down. So, number 1, feminism rejects typical feminine gender roles. You know, motherhood, you know, gentleness, you know, they kind of reject that. They're very pro-choice. You know, abortion is something they value very highly. Promote sexual promiscuity. You know, women are sexually liberated. It's self-guided. There's no outside mandate, you know. It's very into the individual and what you think is best for your life, which is not always wrong, but it is a characteristic of the movement. God is ignored. You know, there's not really much place for God in the movement. Men are viewed as an enemy, you know, as a problem, the patriarchy. And then as flowing from that, women don't need a man. You know, you are basically viewed as this self-sufficient entity. And if you ever rely on a man, you know, you're weak. You know, Gloria Steinem said it. She kind of encapsulated their idea when she said, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Now, I disagree with that. I think there's bike trails in the aquarium, but that is their ideas. So, for the first one, rejecting typical feminine gender roles. Now, out of all of them, this one does at first glance kind of seem to be true, you know, because back then, like, it wasn't a typical gender role to be leading an army. But in the court deposition, one of the men that she worked with, that she fought with, his name was John de Metz, he was one of her soldiers. She told him, for truly no one in the world, and I'm quoting from her deposition, this is like verbatim what she said, For truly no one in the world can regain the kingdom of France. There is no aid except myself, although I would prefer to spin wool beside my poor mother, because this, leading an army, is not in my social rank, but it's necessary that I go and do this, for my Lord wishes that I do it. And when asked who her Lord is, she said God. The other thing she said was, this is during the first trial when they were putting her on trial for heresy. She is quoted as saying, "In sewing and spinning, I fear no woman." So I don't know about you, but a 19-year-old who says she'd rather be spinning wool with her mom and is not afraid, she claims talent in needlework. She doesn't sound like someone who's challenging that time's gender roles. Sounds like she would go back to the gender roles first chance she got. So, number 2, pro-choice. I find it hard to believe that Joan would support killing an unborn child, because also they testified during the 4th session of her trial that she had never killed anyone. Instead, what she did was she was a standard bearer. So what they normally did back then was you would have a flag that was kind of the symbol of your army, and that was your standard. And that flag was to be kept flying throughout the whole battle. And that was not just for morale, but it was also kind of like a status. A general could look out across the field, and if he saw that the standard was still flying, they knew that the battle was still, winnable. If the standard lowered or, heaven forbid, fell, then they knew that defeat was imminent, So that's where we also get the saying, keep your standards high or don't lower your standards. That's where we get that saying. She said she carried it in order to avoid killing anyone. So I think that makes the point. And she is also quoted as saying that French blood made her hair stand on end. So if she wouldn't kill a grown man who is a clear and present danger in battle, I find it really hard to believe that she would kill an unborn child. So to be fair, she was never asked about abortion, so I guess we'll never know for sure, but I think it's pretty safe to say we can extrapolate what she probably would have said. Third one, promote sexual promiscuity. I find this one hard to believe. Joan often referred to herself as and I'm going to butcher the French, La Pucelle, I believe it is, and what that means is the virgin. There was a prophecy that a virgin would save France, and so when she was presenting herself as hey, I'm here to lead these battles and help you guys, she would often refer to herself as, I'm a virgin, I'm the prophecy, and they did a medical examination and she was in fact a virgin. So she was clearly proud of that, she did not feel any shame about it. Nowadays, if you're a virgin, there does tend to be, a lot of people in society look down on you and they act like there's something wrong with you. Clearly, she didn't have any hang-ups like that. The other thing she's quoted as saying is, she also said that she had promised the saints whose voices she would often hear guiding her, the ones that were hey, you need to go lead an army. She promised them that she would maintain my virginity for as long as it pleases God. Doesn't sound very promiscuous there. And lastly, according to eyewitness accounts of the soldiers, she did not like prostitutes. So if you are familiar with battles and, a lot of the war history, it's very common for prostitutes to follow the camps of soldiers, because they make a lot of money. But she did not like that. Joan would basically, she'd take the flat of her sword and she would drive out the prostitutes. And she had a rule for her men that if they were caught with a prostitute, they had to either marry this girl, or the girl had to either marry the soldier or leave. However, the soldier, he had to either marry her, leave, or face the consequences, which implies, back then they had, I think they might still have it a little bit in the military, I don't know, but corporal punishment. So if he, that was very strongly frowned on. So it doesn't sound like, I don't think she was someone who believed if it feels good, do it. Number 4, self-guided, no outside mandate. The individual is the end-all be-all of decision-making. This one is fairly obvious. She did not go into this on her own. She claimed to be told from, the saints in heaven. She claimed to hear voices. It was St. Michael, St. Catherine, and I think there was one more. But these saints, they didn't appear to her visually, but they appeared auditorily. She could hear them. and they told her to go. And funnily enough, when they first appeared to her, she refused to go. She was like, are you crazy? Like, I don't know how to ride horses. I don't know how to fight in a battle. No, I'm not going. I'm not taking that on. And she actually like dragged her feet about it and didn't go for 2 years. So then finally, you know, she went, you know, because they were insistent, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna have to do this. But you know, that is not something that she did on her own as like some kind of social justice warrior, you know, like, I don't like the way this king isn't, you know, being crowned, I'm gonna go take care of this myself. You know, that was not her motivation. And the other thing too is, you know, when people would ask her like, why are you doing this, she said, my Lord wishes that I do it. That was her answer. Like, well, God. And they asked her, who's your Lord? Well, God, Christ. And so that was, you know, her motivation was clear. It was not a self-guided thing. Number 5, God is often ignored. You know, for feminists, there really isn't much, you know, you can have Christian feminists. I'm not saying you can't. But in general, the movement does not really make God much of a part of it. Now, Joan, as we've already heard in some of her quotes, clearly she was very aware of like spirituality, of Christ. She relied on him for a lot of her decision making. And then the soldiers that she fought with, they often said she'd go off by herself to pray. They also said that she required all the troops to go to mass and confession regularly. And then also in the Battle of, and again, I'm going to butcher the French, but in the Battle of Jargeau, I think it is, after being hit with a large stone thrown by an English soldier, she got knocked off her horse, and she quickly got up, and she said, friends, friends, up, our Lord has doomed the English. So, I mean, she gets knocked off her horse, and she's like, our Lord's they're doomed, we're gonna do it. And so you can see that, like, God is the first thing she thinks about, even in a crisis, because getting knocked off your horse in battle in the 1400s, that was pretty much a death sentence, okay? Like, you get off, when you're up on a horse, you have a vantage point and you're hitting down. It's a lot easier to defend yourself down than, you know, somebody up trying to attack, you know? So if you fall off your horse, that's a big deal. But again, she falls off the horse, and the first thing she did is she's talking about God. So clearly, you know, she was very focused on God. He was, you know, always just an ever-present reality to her. So number 6, men are viewed as the enemy, you know, the patriarchy. I doubt Joan, I doubt she believed in a patriarchy, and here's why. She did not have any resentment toward men. She's quoted by Gobert Thibault, one of her soldiers, who again was quoted in one of these depositions, and she said, so to give you some context, some background, after Joan had won some battles, when she would go in these different areas throughout the countryside fighting wars, fighting these battles, people would like flock around her. Like, she became like a celebrity. And a lot of men would show up and be like, hey, I want to join your army. And she'd be like, great. So it would kind of turn into like a recruiting tour. And then there was also a part where after the French king was crowned, you know, she was like, she needed to get more men. There were more battles to be fought. So she did do a special recruiting tour. And in one of these recruiting tours, she is quoted by Gobert Thibault as clapping him on the shoulder and saying she would very much like to have more men of such goodwill as myself. So he basically said that she basically, you know, smacked him on the back and was like, man, I'd love to have more guys like you, you know, in her army. And then at the coronation, when they finally, you know, after all these battles, when the king was finally crowned, they said, all the eyewitness accounts said that she was like hugging his knees, crying. She was like so happy. And so I don't think somebody who's, you know, patting men on the back and being like, yeah, man, I'd love to have more guys like you in my army. And, you know, she's like humbling herself in front of all these men, crying at some guy, hugging some guy's like legs, like at his knees. Like, that's not somebody who views men as an enemy and like, you know, thinks there's this patriarchal conspiracy. Like, that does not sound like someone who believes in that. So, and the last one, women don't need a man. Now this one is, again, this is another one that at first glance maybe sounds like it could have some truth to it, because she never married. you know, and as far as we know, she never talked about having any boyfriends or having any crushes or just anything like that. She was just pretty obsessed with our Lord. Like, when you read her depositions and you read the things she says, like, our Lord was it for her. So I think that's interesting, you know. She refers to him in letters as King Jesus, you know, so that's a very personal term, you know, like he's a real person to her. And then this is an interesting story. So back then, obviously, it's the 1400s and they're not going to send email. So instead, they wanted to get a message. The English wanted to get a message out to the French and to Joan specifically. So they tie the message, the letter, around an arrow and they shoot the arrow over the wall. And then, you know, she gets the message. Sorry, I got this backward. They were sending the message to the English. And so when the English got the letter, they said, oh, it's news from the whore. And that was the name they were giving her. She was the whore of the Armagnacs. I don't know how to say that. Basically the whore of the French. And so what she did, the first thing they say in the deposition, one of her soldiers who saw this, he says that she immediately began to sigh and weep abundant tears, calling the King of Heaven to her aid. And afterwards she was consoled because she had news from our Lord. Like, that is what she said. Well, I feel better because I got news from our Lord. Again, like, clearly she had a really close relationship with our Lord. And so I think if someone were to tell her, you know, do you need a man? She'd probably be like, yes, I need our Lord. So, having said that, those are some reasons that I think she's not a feminist icon. I think she's actually very feminine, even though, you know, she had to, you know, fight in a battle and do a very masculine job. You know, she had to do a very masculine thing. Clearly she was still feminine. You know, she's very attached to our Lord. She was able to cooperate with these men, yet at the same time also lead them. And, you know, she didn't really have any kind of resentment for, you know, her society's gender roles or herself as a woman. And I think that's very, you know, I think she's a good role model, and that we would all do well to imitate her. So anyways, I hope that was helpful or entertaining, something to think about. So yeah, leave a comment if you have any questions. You can like, share, subscribe, do all the things. Yeah,